U.S. Special Forces are openly operating within Mexico. We have a protest, which was supposedly led by Gen Z, carrying the flag of noted manga, One Piece. Lucas, this seems to be one of the most bizarre images I've seen in a long time. We've got Mexico, we've got the One Piece logo coming along with it. Is this like somehow resonating with the youth of Mexico? They're big One Piece fans. Like, why are they carrying this flag to their revolution?
This revolution or this protest that was held in Mexico City at the palace, that occurred over the weekend, flying the One Piece flag, um, is of uh, is of less consequence than we are being led to believe here in the United States. We saw the One Piece flag in Nepal with the recent Discord revolution there. We've seen the One Piece flag flown in Indonesia. We know that the United States State Department has been actively trying to make changes in regimes around the world that would be more to new regimes that would be more friendly to United States policy. And top of the list is not Nicolas Maduro, but probably Claudia Sheinbaum and maybe the Canadian Prime Minister. Um, so, in short, this is a this revolution in Mexico is um, almost certainly being pushed by American State Department, USAID, however they foment revolutions around the world, whatever that may be. But we should be asking ourselves why. I don't think that it has any chance of success due to Claudia Scheinbaum's popularity in Mexico, but the United States is going to use this tool in a barrage of other tools to bring a fight that Donald Trump has been talking about openly with the Mexican drug cartels. And we've also seen the gathering of American forces in the Caribbean, near Trinidad and Tobago, north of Venezuela, and a lot of rhetoric going back and forth about Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. But I think uh, the the fighting is going to be concentrated more so on Mexican drug cartels than any cartels that exist, Tren de Aragua or the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns in Venezuela and Colombia. But I also think that there's an understanding of the shadow power structure that exists in Central and South America, what drives those shadow governments or that shadow power structure south of our border, and the United States is going to attack it with force.
And with Mexico operating in the way that it is right now, if the cartels are as strong as they are, and we have the political opposition in Mexico mostly being taken out en masse, and Scheinbaum being the last person standing, is this kind of feels like Mexico is almost operating as a failed state if the cartels are actually in power.
So I think what you're referring to are the numerous assassinations, political assassinations that have occurred in Mexico. I mean, and
Yeah, was
elsewhere
it what
across
yeah,
South
wasn't there
America.
like a clean sweep in Mexico? Like almost all the opposition political members they're all dead now.
Yes, something I believe in the last federal election there were 37 assassinations. We recently also saw the mayor of a large city in Michoacan assassinated, Carlos Monza, and I begin wondering also uh, with the gathering of American troops in the Caribbean and other events, both domestically and around the world, with regards to what America's military is up to, if that was going to trigger some events with regards to ramping up or escalating this fight with the Mexican drug cartels. So yes, the opposition in Mexico, likewise the Machado opposition in Venezuela, their claims are the government is compromised because of the power of the cartels. Um, Claudia Scheinbaum's response to this to assertions that her government is too friendly with the cartels or works with the cartels is that America has a drug addiction problem. So that that's not going to float too well with the Trump administration. The Trump administration is more much more keen on blaming others, blaming our neighbors to the south. They may agree with it privately, but they're not going to admit that as far as their policy goes. And so we've also talked about the Trump administration, or I should say President Trump's desire in his first administration to bring troops from around the world back closer to the United States. The 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 failure of American military operations in the Ukraine, in the Middle East, against Yemen, in China, and their desire to come out with a win. Their reassertions, I should say, of the Monroe Doctrine, the claim that the America should be focused on our neighbors and our hemisphere, and leave Europe and Asia to themselves. So with all of those converging, it's no surprise to me that the Trump administration is making good on the rhetoric that they that especially Donald Trump brought to the campaign in the lead up to the presidential election, with regards to Mexican drug cartels being a huge security, not just a security problem in America, something that had already infiltrated America, and not just the violence of the drug cartels, but also the devastation that the drugs that have been brought into the United States bring. So I'm not surprised to see the Trump administration bringing the troops here, and not just bringing them here, but putting special forces into Mexico, and sending the State Department out to cause political chaos in Mexico City. This is sadly how they operate.
And as I was looking back on special forces operations in Mexico and how long this has been reported on, this goes back as far as at least February of this year that we've been talking about special forces being in Mexico, this being public knowledge. Has something happened recently other than this supposed protest which occurred that seems like it could have been orchestrated by the CIA? Are we seeing things that bring this fresh to light? Is it just that the naval forces are there in the Venezuelan waters, and we're waiting for Trump to actually move boots on the ground into a landed operation? Or what's specifically prompting you to think more about this beyond just the Gen Z uprising?
So I saw a report. Well, one, Claudia Sheinbaum has been saying to the Mexican people that they were not going to allow an American military intervention in Mexico, back whenever this rhetoric was going on in the campaign. Recently, I saw that Claudia Sheinbaum
And
had
she said that
agreed.
as recently as 2 days ago as well. I mean, this article came out, I think, on the 15th, so on Saturday.
I saw reports after the assassination of Carlos Monza that she had agreed to allow special forces operations within Mexico. Maybe that was a red herring. Back in February, she did allow special forces to begin training with Mexican troops. So that was a step towards cooperation with the United States. Now, I think I don't think that any politician, or I don't think that Sheinbaum or AMLO, uh, are excited about working with the drug cartels, but they do have enormous power in Mexico. So I think part of the calculation of the United States, with the revolution, with the pressure, with the public rhetoric from the Trump administration or from Donald Trump, is to back Sheinbaum into a corner so that she has to work with the United States in in cornering these drug cartels. So I um, I would say that regardless of whether they're publicly acknowledging it, we have to assume that uh, that the United States has moved the concentration of their covert operations to bring to bear against the cartels. Nothing else makes sense with this whole Venezuela. All the rhetoric with regards to Venezuela, the cartels in Venezuela is ignoring those in Colombia and especially Mexico. And when we look back to how Donald Trump operates, he makes a scene close to his point. Politicians, the politicians in that are adjacent and understand that they are being targeted, they move accordingly, and the Trump administration uh, either continues with their true plans or accepts um, the new cooperation from the government. But when I have seen the move towards Venezuela, the rhetoric towards Venezuela, even back in the campaign, I thought this actually has everything to do with Mexico, and this is going to come to a head in Mexico, not in Venezuela.
So, with Trump having directed special forces into the country back in February, at least as far back as I can see of recent reporting, that means they've been on i- operating within the country for something like 8 to 10 months, at least, that has been reported on. So now we've got some activities happening here, and do you have a sense of how fast this might come to a head? Is this like that the Mexican people are actively waiting for something to occur, or that like this is bubbling up? It's hard to get as much of a sense, like given what we saw in the protests, that maybe it wasn't as well populated, or that this is not necessarily genuine. Is this is this is just a cover for the CIA to do something more overt, to try to bring
Well,
order to
when
war?
I think the revolution has more to do so with selling this to the American people, um, because again, I think the military, the Trump administration, and the military are going to take the steps. They designated the cartels a terrorist organization. They've been lining up the dominoes to bring this fight to Mexico. Now we haven't mentioned all of the boats that were targeted in the Caribbean. 2 days ago, the military targeted and blew up a boat that was in the Pacific Ocean. So that tells us that they're operating on both sides of Mexico now, um, and gives us an eye towards where the actual focus of these operations actually are. But I think that the color revolution um, was not intended to be successful. It's intended to carry a narrative to the American people that Mexico wants this war, and to meanwhile back politicians like Claudia Sheinbaum into a corner. Now, the other thing that is interesting to me as we bring this fight is the ideological the ideological separation between the United States and the likes of communist or socialist Venezuela, socialist Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum, since her election, has nationalized the electric utilities, uh, companies and Petrobras, the oil refining company in Mexico. So when we think about who America's true enemies are around the world, who we've targeted in the history of the United States around the world, it's usually governments that are leftist. And here we have with the election of I believe Petros in Colombia. I forget his name. He's a good account to follow on Twitter, if I could remember it. But we have an alignment of leftist countries in South America, and I think this is also threatening to a contingency, not necessarily Donald Trump. I think his fair trade policies and ideas of sovereignty of countries around the world are aligned with these leftist countries. But when we look at Marco Rubio and the warhawk neocon liberal wing in the Republican Party, in the Democratic Party, that Donald Trump has to work with or has to manage, they are very keen to bring this fight to Central and South America. And Marco Rubio's selection and position as the Secretary of State, very interesting. He is a Cuban American that has an axe to grind with Cuba, and rather than blaming the history of Cuba on American intervention there, he chooses to put the blame on the shoulders of Cuba and these socialist governments to our southern border. And his solution is to overthrow them all.
And so is Venezuela just a red herring? Is it just a reason to position some of the military forces, or are you rethinking what the position on Venezuela is?
I think the reason that Venezuela has led in the narrative as we bring this fight to our southern border is because of their ideological opposition to the United States. At one time in the Kennedy administration in the 60s and in the 50s, that locus of concern was Cuba. But post wars in Iraq, Venezuela has led the ideological resistance to the United States, ideological resistance not necessarily from Russia or Iran. We also, I think, need to be concerned with, during the Cold War, our concerns with Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis, with Nicaragua and Venezuela, were the proximity to the United States. Now, Russia has demonstrated their new weapons, the Poseidon and the Berezhnikov,
The missile that can travel under the radar, the nuclear powered one.
The nuclear power, the missiles that I guess escalate the attack, the proximity of attack to worldwide, because they're nuclear powered, they can be launched from anywhere, fly for however long is necessary to reach their targets. So I think part of the Russian decision for not only building but demonstrating those weapons at this time is to say, hey, your concern about us bringing ballistic missiles to Cuba or to Venezuela are unfounded. We don't need to do that anymore. But they also have their eye on the future, on trade relationships, relationships with South and Central America, in a world after the United States has ceded some of its power over international trade, which the United States is very quickly doing. So I do think there is also very real that the United States should be very concerned about, especially the Mexican drug cartels just south of our border. and not because of ballistic missiles, but because of the change that we've seen in how war is waged. And by that I mean the prevalence of drones, the precision, and um, and the the escalation of guerrilla warfare that drones and let's also throw in, some of Israel's tactics with regards to their fight with Iran, Hezbollah, and
The
Hamas.
pagers, and the
The pa-
ability to, yeah.
yeah. So I think the United States is thinking about those problems, and this is why, despite the rhetoric about this being about Venezuela, about about concerns, the ideological concerns, I think that is all a facade. But the real target here is the Mexican cartels, and I think this also, if we understand that, we see why the Trump administration has been so concerted in their efforts to um, in their efforts to deport illegals from the United States, and despite the unpopularity of the presence of ICE in various cities. But that is also when I look at not just their dispatching of ICE into various cities where they're incredibly unpopular, but backing them up with National Guard, that may have been in preparation for what kind of response that we might be getting from the cartels um, if the operations against them are not immediately successful.
Oh, I think I'm connecting the dots here. So if there is a ground war in Mexico against the cartels, that there might be a domestic backlash because there's enough cartel presence in the United States that they could actually start some kind of trouble, start doing terrorist activities in the United States in response to what's happening in Mexico as the US military starts to wage war more directly.
Absolutely. And again, take a look back at what happened in Iran uh, after Israel's initial attack. Israel's initial attack was largely successful because they had paid off uh, Pakistani and Afghani refugees and Indian refugees in their countries to provide information about military sites within Iran. Also, not just military sites, but the locations of military personnel, and had disabled a lot of their anti-aircraft defenses. So when we think about that sort of vulnerability of in the United States, the open borders policy of the United States are of great concern. Now, for 50 or 70 years, we've been able to pay off not just the world, but populations within the United States through our power and our ability to manipulate the dollar, the currency that was being used by the world. But um, if the world no longer accepts that system, then we can expect domestic pressure within the United States. And if there's domestic pressure within the United States, then we're going to see dissident groups turning towards violence. And I think this is again not just about the Mexican cartels, but a broader concern about um, what could be coming down the economic pipeline, or for the United States. And so again, I think the Trump administration has pursued these unpopular deportation policies because they're very concerned about this in the future. So I don't know if they think that they have a proper. I can't imagine that they think that they have an America. Um, uh, have to. I don't know how to put this. I don't know if they think they have cleansed the United States of dissidents, of foreign actors, enough uh, to be ready to bring this fight to the cartels. But I think it's these pressures outside the world that are causing them to act now. Um, and again, when I saw the murder of, or the assassination of, Carlos Monza, because the United States had been gathering their troops in Venezuela, and that had set up a sort of ticking time bomb as to, well, what is the next move? And the United States doesn't want to go to war with Venezuela, doesn't want to be drawn into further conflicts in Europe or Asia or Africa. And we're also seeing an escalation of violence in Africa, along the Sahel states. And I don't think that the Trump administration wants to be wasting our resources there. So in order to forestall that narrative building, why aren't we helping out in Africa? Why aren't we helping Christians being murdered by radical Muslims in the Sahel states? It's come time to um, openly engage in the fight in Mexico. So I think that's the point that we're at now.
And I think one of the things we're going to need to watch for, as far as seeing this play out, what happens to the National Guard that's been positioned in various states, because this was front and center in the news for quite some time. We were hearing the various governors disagreeing with the federal government about these Guard troops being positioned within their cities. There was pushback from Pritzker, from Newsom, what was happening in Portland. But this source says that perhaps these troops are being moved out of these states. So we'll have to watch very carefully as far as this goes, to see if it is coordinated with what's happening down in Mexico, and whether these U.S. National Guard do get returned back home, or if they stay put so that they can assist with the ground operations.
You know, we're already hearing more mention of the Monroe Doctrine. And when I hear the Monroe Doctrine invoked, it is often couched in this idea of America is powerful. America gets to dictate its policies in the Western Hemisphere, and Russia and China. That this was the Cold War understanding of it, right? Russia and China should not be bringing their communist ideas over, and they should allow the United States to dominate the Americas. But the original idea behind the Monroe Doctrine was to kick out the colonial powers. That the United States had defeated the British and the French the colonialism of Britain and France in North America, and that we should turn to the Spanish colonies to our south, to Cuba, to Mexico, to South America, and that if the American experiment was to have any chance of success, then we needed to fight colonialism. So, and Donald Trump, in his inauguration address, he invoked McKinley. McKinley was the president at the time that the United States made the decision to engage in the Spanish-American War, to kick out Spain, and they had already. The Mexican-American War back in 1848-50 was a little bit problematic. That was, but some of the ideals of the Spanish-American War were not that the United States was going to become a colonial power itself, but that it was going to fight colonialism. Now, McKinley was assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt became president after McKinley. And Teddy Roosevelt, if you remember, sent the fleet of American ships around the world and said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." So this was at the point when the Republican ideas of bringing the American system across across North and South America was corrupted, and the United States backed itself into becoming a colonial empire power. I can't imagine that Donald Trump would be invoking McKinley, would be invoking fair trade, and be ignorant of that nuance with regards to American history. So I have some small hope that Donald Trump is engaging in rhetoric that is attractive to the liberal, colonizing, neoconservative faction within his government, but he wants to trap them into securing the American fair trade system for our neighbors. So that's something that I would be on the lookout for rhetorically as Donald Trump begins to address American military actions with our neighbors. And I also think that we've talked about Mexico. We haven't talked a lot about Canada. And there is there's sort of a narrative of amity between Canada and the United States. But Donald Trump also, early in his administration, one of the first claims that he made was sort of a joking reference to making Canada the 51st state. We've also talked about the railroad, the Trans-Siberian Railroad, connecting up with North America, and this also being one of these progressive Republican plans going back to the 1860s. I think Donald Trump believes in those ideas, but he's going to need to secure the American system, not just for Mexico and our neighbors to the south, but also to Canada in the north. So I think that I think that if we get into a hot conflict with the cartels to our south, to the south, in Mexico, Cuba, wherever it may be, Nicaragua, I think that the Trump administration would have already had plans to raise rhetoric about concerns with our much longer land border with Canada to our north, and setting up agreements to ensure American safety, despite whatever policies Canada may have. I don't know if you've also noticed Canada has been openly pursuing this policy to dramatically increase its population, and their immigration rates to Canada have been hundreds of thousands of people, and Canada is a much smaller population than the United States. This is not something that we should we should not be hoodwinked into remembering Canada as the Canada of John Candy and other comedians of our past. Canada is part of the British imperial system that is its last hold here in the Americas, and one of the methods that Britain uses to maintain control on its former colonies is to import large numbers of foreign populations into those countries, and I think they've been doing exactly that in Canada. So we have a very old colonial fight with Spanish colonies to ourselves, but we have an older and deeper fight to the identity of America with Canada to our north. And so I can't imagine that we're not going to see some of that relationship, or that I don't know. Can I call it a relationship? I guess we can. But some of that conflict from our past come to the fore with Canada very soon also.
Well, and with bringing up the shipping and the rail lines potentially that are going through the northern part of North America and the Trans-Siberian Railway, and what can happen with Canada, what does this have to do with international shipping? Because it seems to me that if the focus is on railroads and that things are going to be moved by rail, this is what moving us away from shipping lanes and using the oceans to transport goods in favor of using railroads instead.
So in part, I think the security of the goods that are being moved are very different between shipping. When we put goods on a ship and cast them out into international waters, um, that is a system that lends itself towards globalist corporations. But when we talk about the shipping empire, um, uh, and and also global corporations and how they operate with autonomy inside of countries, that has been a system that has been born on the I don't know, the code of pirates that exist in international waters. And that's very appealing to, an island nation like Great Britain, an island nation that's augmented by ideas of corporations and fractionalizing ownership, that they picked up from the Dutch. But there was an older trade system that existed before, that shipping system was used to defeat the sovereignty of nations around the world, and that was carrying things over the land. Now, uh, spice, the old spice roads, um, the old system of the spice roads in Asia, the people actually carried the goods and passed them from border to border. I think what we take from the modern the advent of the shipping empire is this notion of railroads in which the goods are carried, but there are agreements between sovereign countries that as to what the taxes or the duties on the goods that are entering, and an agreement that they're going to be allowed to pass through. But that brings back a great amount of power and sovereignty to these various nations around the world. You can't just pick another direction to carry the goods and figure out some port to secure to bring those goods inside various countries. So that is, I think, the great political difference of returning to overland routes.
Is that it solidifies these international agreements or these agreements between the various countries where the goods are traveling on rail lines entering their country. You can't just pick a different sea route, go to a different port, circumvent tariffs. I think actually some of that was happening as Trump started to put tariffs on goods the that they would ship it to a different place and then bring it in a different way, and then it would circumvent some of the policies. So this sense lend itself towards having known routes of transport that are normalized and that you can't necessarily just work around conditions that are being put, or treaties or other types of tariff enforcement policies between these different countries.
Yeah, and again, going to Peter Navarro's address to the Council of Foreign Relations now over a month ago, he talked specifically about this and uh, how the notion that commerce is is the best tool to use in maintaining good relations and maintaining peace throughout the world has been subverted um, by the shipping empire. I mean, we also have this phrase, the rules based order. The rules based order are the rules that have been enforced by a multinational corporation, and not that have not acknowledged um, the sovereignty of nations around the world. So when we see, revolutions in Iran and Mexico and Venezuela, that have to do with international corporations taking their resources, and when they complain that they didn't get their cut of the deal according to the agreement that was signed beforehand, and the international corporation says, "Oh, but you didn't know about this, this, and this," and engaging in lawfare in order to continue to rob them of those resources, that's been the way of the shipping empire. And they've also engaged in the devious tricks of replacing regimes to favorable regimes, whenever the will of the existing government or the people was subverted. So Donald Trump again wants to change this, wants to take us back to fair trade, talks about the importance of sovereignty, and I very much think he has a point there. So over time, I don't know if we want to continue to go down this rail, but the difference between overland routes and shipping routes is fundamental has a fundamental impact in the way that countries get along and have relations with other countries around the world.
Well, we'll be watching for developments in Mexico and what happens. Definitely, we've been watching with great interest ever since the assassination of the Mexican mayor. Now that we see the CRA is more ramping up their efforts, we'll have a keen eye towards what occurs here next, especially with the National Guard deployments. I think that you're right with about all the time we've got, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.